Absolutely. So I'm really grateful for Mira and the whole team there for inviting me here today to speak to you guys. My name is Dr. Nicole Avena. I am an associate professor of neuroscience. Actually, just got promoted literally like 2 days ago, so very proud of that, at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York City. And then I'm also a visiting professor of health psychology at Princeton University. And so my interests are really in nutrition and how it can have an impact throughout the lifespan. I actually got interested in nutrition when I was doing my PhD in neuroscience at Princeton. And we were trying to better understand the obesity epidemic and how maybe processed food and food in general could produce addictive-like responses in the brain. And then, I quickly, got interested in just understanding more aspects of how eating unhealthy can have a negative impact on our health. It's not just about obesity and type 2 diabetes and these other health conditions that come up when people don't eat the right foods, but it also kind of come back to our fertility as well. And this is something that, is a bit of a personal issue with me as well, because I struggled with infertility when my husband and I were trying to conceive our second child. And so I have a personal interest in understanding how we can improve our fertility through nutrition and how we can take a look at what we're eating and see how it could perhaps have a negative impact on our fertility. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you all about today. I want to talk about fertility support, prenatal and early life nutrition, and why they're so important. And so I'm going to talk about fertility, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about early life nutrition, meaning nutrition during the first couple of months of pregnancy and why that's so important. I'm just trying to, here we go. Okay. So there's this whole concept that's become really interesting called the first 1,000 days of life. And there's been a lot of research that's been focused on this lately. And it's important because we know that the first 1,000 days is a critical window of development. And so that goes from the period of pregnancy through the end of the second year of life. And so from conception through the baby's second birthday. And this is really important because we know that there's so much that's happening developmentally during this time. And we also know from research that what happens during this window can have a long-lasting impact, not only on health outcomes, but also on cognitive development, also on immune function responses. And so there's a lot that's happening during this time that can have an impact on the health and well-being as the baby gets older. So one of the things that we know that this is an important window because, like I mentioned, most of the cognitive development is really being captured during this time. And when we think about, how short of amount of time this is, I mean, really those first 2 years and those 9 months of pregnancy, it goes by so quickly. And I know from my experience, you're so busy and everything is happening all at one time. There's so much to manage. Sometimes nutrition kind of gets put on the back burner and you're relying on more processed foods, or, you're not necessarily able to really carefully plan out the meals for your baby and for yourself while you're pregnant. But we're learning that is so important, and that it is important to make sure that you get the right balance of nutrients and that your baby's getting exposed to the right balance of nutrients as well. So one of the things that we know is problematic that's associated with this is the fact that malnutrition remains to be a significant problem for young children. And even for us adults who are maybe trying to get pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, there's this big misconception out there that if you are a healthy weight, or even if you're overweight, that you can't be malnourished. And that's actually not the case. There are plenty of people who are normal weight or who are overweight or obese who are actually malnourished because they're deficient in one or more of the essential micronutrients that they need. So just because your body weight might be a certain state doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting all the nutrition that you need. And it's important to understand this because lack of proper nutrition in these early parts of life can have a lifelong impact, and sometimes it can be irreversible. And so we do want to make sure that we're getting a variety of different nutrients and eating all of the different things that are available to us so that we can improve our chances of getting access to all the nutrients that we need. Also, one of the things I've noticed is that there's really a lack of information for parents and even for women during pregnancy regarding the type of nutrients that are important at the different stages. I remember when I got pregnant with my first daughter, it was really, an exciting time. And I thought, wow, I know all about this stuff. I'm, studying nutrition for a living. I'll be just fine in terms of what I need to do. And I was a little bit at a loss because when I did go to visit my doctor, they literally never ever once asked me, what kind of foods am I eating? And they just weighed me on the scale. And there really was no nutritional counseling or, advice about what you should eat. It was all about what you shouldn't eat and what you should avoid. And that's actually what prompted me to write one of my books, What to Eat When You Want to Get Pregnant. And subsequent to that, I've written another book called What to Eat When You Want to Get Pregnant. So we are very well aware now that there is a need for education in women who are pregnant about what foods they should eat. And then also leading up to that, when people are interested in improving their chances of getting pregnant, what kind of foods should they be focusing on as well? So one of the things that we can do is that we can capitalize on what we do know about early exposure to healthy foods to help set our babies and potential babies down the road on the right healthy path. And so there is this inborn evolutionary drive to have certain types of taste preferences. And so one of the reasons why it's so hard for us to eat a healthy diet all the time is because we are biologically drawn toward wanting to eat those high sugar foods and those highly processed foods. We're basically designed that way. These types of foods that are loaded with sweet sugars and other sweeteners and also have salt, they have a very powerful hedonic appeal. And the foods that are perhaps, healthier for us, if you think about like broccoli and cauliflower, they actually have a more bitter or aversive taste, especially among children, because children tend to taste things in a more exaggerated way than we do. And so not being exposed to these types of foods early in during a pregnancy or, early in life can have a negative impact on the ability to then want to accept and try these healthy foods later on, just because we have to overcome that natural sort of desire to always want to eat sweet things. So I'll show you some examples. These are actual pictures of newborn babies that have a response to basic tastes. So these babies were given a little bit of sweet put in their mouth, or a little bit of sour, a little bit of bitter, and a little bit of salt. And you can see that the facial responses of the babies who get the sweet and the salt, they seem like they're pretty happy, right? They're seeming very, happy with that taste. But the bitter and the sour causes the baby to make this sort of aversive response. And that's, again, because we have this inborn neurological programming to make us respond that way. So that's why it is a little bit of a challenge sometimes for people to, eat these foods that are perhaps a little bit bitter. And also why it's not so hard for us to then want to go eat those sweets and those other things that have lots of added sugars and salts in them. So it isn't just what, but also when that matters. And I think that this is a really important point because, we talk about getting good nutrition, but we have to keep in mind that there's stages associated with it, right? So especially even pregnancy, what you need for your nutritional needs in the first trimester of pregnancy are pretty different than what you need in the third trimester of pregnancy. And I think that that's one of the things that we're starting to see more information and education about, and I talk about it in What to Eat When You're Pregnant, is that, what you're eating each week should actually be different because your nutritional needs for the baby and also for you for a healthy pregnancy are actually changing as the baby grows and develops and has different organ systems developing and different parts of their body are growing and developing. So that's why it's important to think about this as a journey in many ways, in which you're going to have a variety of different types of foods that are perhaps required more so than others at different stages of a pregnancy. And then the same goes for little ones too, once the babies are born. Now, it all starts with fertility, and that's why we're here. That's really the topic of this session today. And one of the things that we're learning about is that many women are now waiting until later in life to have babies for a variety of different reasons. Some of it is just that they decide they want to wait. Sometimes it's because they're focusing on a career. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why people wait to have a baby or take some time to have a baby. But one of the things that we do know is that our fertility starts to decline when we're in our 20s. And, we're finding that many women are now delaying fertility and delaying getting pregnant until they're in their late 30s or even into their 40s. And so this delay can mean that there is many more women that are seeking fertility treatments or seeking resources to help them conceive quickly, because if you wait until your 40s to start having a baby, then you're not going to have as much time available for it. So you're going to want to make sure it happens kind of quickly. We also know that there's been a lot of research looking at different types of factors like diet and lifestyle and how they can have an impact on genes. And many of these genes are this is something that's referred to as epigenetics. And some of these things can be turned on and turned off over time. And we're seeing that this can happen in terms of fertility as well and have a negative impact on fertility in some cases. So when we talk about getting pregnant and thinking about boosting our fertility, I like to tell people that, it's really something you need to be thinking about as early as you can, because you want to be protecting your fertility and making sure that it's going to be there for you when you need it. And that involves doing things like making sure that you're trying to maintain a healthy body weight, making sure that you're reducing exposure to toxins in your environment, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and really just making sure that you're getting all those important nutrients in your diet so that you can boost your fertility. Now, this is a rundown of the nutrient needs of women that can support fertility. And so this is what is recommended in terms of the different nutrients that are out there to help boost your fertility. Now, I will say that that doesn't mean you need to take every single one of these supplements, because a lot of this you're getting from foods. But I think it's important for people to know that, many of these different nutrients that are important for us to get, if you're eating a certain diet or, you're excluding certain food groups from your diet, you may be finding that you're deficient in one or more of these nutrients, and that can have a negative impact on your fertility. Also, in what to eat when you want to get pregnant, I talk about all these different nutrients, and I also talk about where you can get them, because not everybody knows that, clams are a great source of selenium. And so knowing that these nutrients are important is important for the process, but you have to know how you can get them and what foods you can consume to help get the appropriate amount of these nutrients that you need each day. And so I think it's important to have that information so that you can make more informed decisions about which foods you're choosing to eat, so that you don't necessarily have to take a supplement every day. Or if you are going to take a supplement, perhaps you don't have to take one, that contains folate or folic acid, if you're getting a lot of it already from the foods that you're eating, although it's recommended that you do take a supplement with folate or folic acid, especially early in pregnancy. So if you are trying to get pregnant, you should think about adding one of those. But you might not need to take a B12 supplement, let's say, because if you're getting enough of B12 through your diet, then you might not need to take a supplement with it. So it's important to know what foods contain these different nutrients so you could decide which types of nutrients you may or may not need to supplement with. Now, another thing we want to talk about is toxins. These are in our foods that can have a negative impact on our fertility. They're also in our environment. And the reality is this is a problem for fertility. There's been a lot of research going on looking at the role that toxins in the environment can have on fertility for both women and also for men. There's a significant decline in sperm counts happening right now. And we know that this is tied to environmental exposure to different toxins, many of which come in through our food. So just to kind of break down a few to keep on your radar when thinking about, toxins that we want to try to avoid. And again, we all live in the world. You can't necessarily, hide in your house all day. We're going to be exposed to some of these toxins no matter what we do. But it's really about trying to minimize your exposure and, knowing that when you're around these toxins, they can have a negative impact on your fertility later in life. Some of these things build up in our bodies and stay with us. So, things that we want to think about are trying to buy, organic foods when we can, right? Because we want to try to minimize exposure to pesticides and herbicides. Also, one that I highlight is soda. A lot of people who drink sugar-sweetened beverages, the excess sugar that's in soda beverages can really be bad for your fertility and can have a negative impact not only on your body weight and other health conditions, but certainly can have a negative impact on fertility as well. Bottled water is something I advise people get away from, and we're starting to see more and more people are kind of gravitating toward bringing their own stainless steel water bottle places instead of relying on the bottled water, because there are chemicals that are in the plastic that can leach into the water. And so when you consume it, you're actually consuming those chemicals, and we don't want to be doing that. Also, trying to limit access and exposure to alcohol. I'm not saying that you need to be, completely abstinent if you're trying to conceive, but know that consuming alcohol can have a negative impact on your fertility. So you do want to be mindful of that and make sure that you are limiting it. Also, trans fatty acids. We've heard a lot about trans fatty acids and how they can be, bad for our cardiac health, but we also know that they can be bad for our fertility health as well. So it's important to be mindful of that and to avoid foods that contain trans fats. And, take a look at the nutrition facts labels when you're picking up something to eat, and you can see whether or not the food contains trans fats. So I want to just talk a little bit about nutrients that are needed once the baby's born, because again, I know we're talking about fertility here, but I think that this is, for most of you, I hope, the beginning of a journey where you're going to be thinking about how nutrition plays a role from here on out. So even after you get pregnant, focusing on fertility, and even after that baby's born, focusing on fertility. Focusing on nutrition. And so, the nutrient needs of babies change over time. And there's lots of different ways in which you can get all of those nutrients into the baby by just trying a variety of different foods and having, those available. And one of the things that I think is so important for new parents to understand when they start feeding a baby is you have to just be consistent with repetition, because like I showed you a few slides back, a lot of times if you give babies vegetables, they're going to make that kind of funny face. Doesn't mean they don't like it. It means that, it's not the sweet apples or sweet pears that maybe they were hoping for or expecting. So it is important that you be repetitive. There's been research studies done on this that actually show that it can take up to 10 exposures to a food in order for a baby to grow to like it. So just because your baby might make one of those faces, don't necessarily give up. Maybe try it again later, or at the next meal, try that food again, because you do want to make sure that you are getting your baby exposed to a variety of different foods. A lot of parents fall into this really, really bad trap where their kid will only eat like 3 different things. And that's not good. We got to make sure that the babies are eating a variety of foods in order to get all these nutrients that are important to their health. Now, one thing about sweets, again, I told you I started in this field really looking at processed food addiction and sugar addiction. And, it's still something I always come back to even when I talk about fertility, because it can have a negative impact on our fertility, because when we're eating all these sugar-rich foods, it can cause our blood sugar levels to rise and to fall. And this can have a negative impact on the way our body can process the blood sugar. And as a result, can have a negative impact on our ability to get pregnant, especially for women. So it's not that you need to give up all sweet treats, but I think moderation is key. And I carry this message out when I talk about, how you feed a baby and a little one when it's time for sweet treats. I think the focus needs to be on health and having these things in moderation. And also changing the mindset about, what a sweet treat is. I think with little kids, especially for as long as you can get away with it, they should be under the impression that sweet treats are applesauce, or sweet treats are, bits of fruit that's cut up. It doesn't have to be, a cupcake or a brownie to be a sweet, healthy treat. It could be something like that is an actual healthy treat, like fruit or yogurt that has a little bit of fruit in it. And the thing I want to end with is to point out that it isn't so easy to get all the nutrition that we need from food, and especially when it comes to supporting our fertility. These are some data that show, the goal of how much people should be consuming, that's the black line down the middle. And you can see that, people are not hitting the goal for many of the foods that we need to support our health and to support our fertility. And so we're overdoing it on the things that are actually unhealthy for us, like refined grains and saturated fats and things like that. Whereas we're not getting enough of the things that are going to support our health and especially our fertility health. So it is important to keep this in mind and to really just be mindful about the food choices that you're making, and definitely think about that, because we know that it can have an impact on our fertility, and it can also have an impact on the health outcomes of the babies later on. Okay, so I want to thank you so much for your attention. I want to leave some time for some questions. Here's information for my website. There's lots of different research articles and stories about nutrition as it relates not only to fertility, but also to just lifespan in general. Also, if you're interested in following me on social, I'm at Dr. Nicole Avena. And then I left my email if anyone has any questions. And definitely check out my books. I have a line of books related to, nutrition and not only fertility, but also pregnancy, and then what to feed when your baby gets a little bit older. So I really enjoy speaking about this topic and writing about it. And the books have lots of yummy recipes that I developed, and they're all really healthy.